Welcome to Let's Talk Learning Technology. Do you know the latest in learning technology? Matt and Walter do. From learning authoring tools and animation to virtual reality and everything in between, innovative learning groups Matt Kurtin and Walter Schirmacher geek out on all of it. Get their perspectives on the latest trends, tips and tricks, and recommendations so your learning tech keeps up with the times.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Learning Technology, or as we affectionately refer to it, LT Squared. I'm Matt Kurtin, ILG Senior Director of Technology and Visual Design.
And I'm Walter Schirmacher, one of ILG's programmers.
Today we're going to talk about Adobe Captivate tips and tricks. Before we jump in, I want to acknowledge the long history of products that became inputs to Adobe Captivate. It actually started out with Nexus Concepts Flash Cam in 2001, which is a simple screen recording application, and then became eHelp's Robo Demo in 2002, Macromedia's Captivate in 2004, and finally became Adobe Captivate 2 in 2006. I think, Walter, that's where you jumped in. How long have you been using Adobe Captivate?
I've been using it since it became Adobe Captivate version 2.
So that would put it at over 15 years of experience. So with as long as you've used this tool, I feel sure that you're going to have a number of great tips and tricks to share with us. We might want to talk a little bit, Walter, about what are the reasons why we might use Captivate versus any other tools. And it seems to me that Captivate is very good for software simulations and software demonstrations, but there are some other things that we could use it for. What's your take?
Well, Captivate started off, as you mentioned, as Robo Demo, as one of its many previous names. And so it does have that basic building block of demonstrations and simulations. And so it is very good at doing that. You can even use it to do screen recordings, and it actually can not only capture like screenshots of a screen, but actually can record the animation and the motion, which can be really handy.
So I think what you're saying kind of echoes what I'm saying. That's where its sweet spot is really for software training, whether it would be showing how software works or allowing a user how to practice. And it can be used for general purpose e-learning, but it's not probably its strongest suite of things. Why don't we start out with advanced ways to use states beyond just using them for buttons?
Well, one of the ways I like to use them is for buttons, actually. But I like to add things to them. So if you just have a regular little button, rather than just changing the color on like a hover state, you actually can add to the state, adding like an arrow so it points at which one you're on. I also like to use states to pre-adjust images to different sizes and angles. And that way you can just pre-select which one you want using actions or advanced actions.
So when you say pre-select them, you mean instead of having to rotate something at runtime, you've already rotated it, say, to 90 degrees or something that you can then have it select that? Is that what you mean?
Yes. We actually had a piece of medical equipment, and we had to show it moving and scaling up and down and angling and changing over time, depending on what part of the screen that was selected by the learner. And so we just went in and just pre-made and assigned into a state all those changes. And then when it came down to it, we just said, hey, I want state 1 or state 2 or state 20% or however we named it. And that became really effective. Not only did we get exactly the way the image should look, we also only used one image and just changed and rotated it. So we really saved on the bandwidth there.
All right. And how about using states to create pop-ups or tabbed interactions?
Well, since Captivate does not have pop-ups or tabbed interactions built in, except for some of the learning interactions that have some limitations, I find it really helpful to use states for those things. We can get all the content into an object, and then when the person clicks on a tab, you can then pop up one of the tabbed interactions, or if you're trying to show some pop-up content, you can just flip the state around, and that way everything's all ready to go.
All right, and what if we wanted to include external content in a Captivate project, like an animation or a PDF or a website? What would you do there?
Captivate actually has a few different ways to include items for web objects. It supports PDFs, SVGs, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and animations created in Adobe Animate. Animate makes this easy, as you can publish an HTML5 animation in a format known as OAM, and then directly insert it into Captivate, which makes it really easy to insert it, and it's even scalable then.
So, Walter, what about when we need to maintain our content over time in Captivate? What are some things we can do to easily maintain content and keep it up to date?
One way is to use the library. It's rather like Adobe Animate's library in that you can see all the items that are in use in your project. It also organizes them nicely so you can see images, videos, and audio all in separate parts.
So that seems like it's most similar to the media library for articulate storyline and kind of equivalent within Captivate.
Yep. One of the nice things you can do in there is you actually can right mouse click on an object in the library and then click update, or if you want to swap it out with a different version of it, which does not have the same file name or maybe is located somewhere else, you can actually select properties and then update it or import to replace it with a new file, which is kind of cool. There's also two different windows, which are really useful because one of the harder things in Captivate is where's that audio file being used? And then it actually has a newer window that's called Audio Management, which is available from the audio menu list. And in it, you can see all the audios that are used in the course, what slide they're on, their duration, and the like. You can export those files, you can update them, and the really nice thing is you can actually work with object-level audio.
There's one difference I see from the way that Storyline manages its library versus Captivate, that in Storyline, if you don't have any uses of media, it automatically removes them. But in Captivate, there's that icon that you can click in order to select all unused items. Is it the magnet icon, I believe?
Yep.
And then remove all unused items, which would help you keep your file size from getting big for things that aren't really being used.
Yep. So it also lets you work with the object level audio, which is audio attached to objects like shapes or buttons and such. That audio can be really hard to locate sometimes because it's embedded inside the shape and you don't actually see it on the timeline in Captivate until you click on the shape. So trying to figure out why is there a rogue audio file on this slide and I can't see it. If you go to the audio management window, it'll help you identify where it is.
All right, and then what about video management?
For video management, there's actually a video management window. It's not quite as robust as the audio management window, but it does let you see all the videos used in the course, what slide they're on, what type of video they are, and if they're an external video file, like what URL they're from.
All right, and what would you consider if you were going to develop for mobile phones in Captivate?
Captivate actually has two different approaches for developing responsive design in Captivate. One is fluid boxes and the other are breakpoints. I'm actually going to start with breakpoints first because it's the older technology. So breakpoints are useful when you want to have a good deal of control over the look because it lets you exactly position things where you want them. It has a maximum of 5 resolutions, which are the breakpoints. The breakpoints are where you set the size. It might be 1024 by 768. It might be 500, but it's actually like the width of how wide something will be, and then when that width comes up, that's when that particular look takes over. You can leave out items and replace items on the various breakpoints, which is good. The one downside of it is that the time is greatly increased when using breakpoints as you have to tweak each size and test the in-between sizes. So what I mean by that is if you've got something set on 1024 and then something else set on 500, you need to look and see what does it look like in between 1024 and 500 because as the screen size goes down, the things don't move and things may end up overlapping or not being all visible.
So if I understand right, what you're saying there, it is in the case that you have a phone where the screen width doesn't exactly match one of the 5 resolutions, you got to do some checking to make sure that it works on those phone sizes that fall in between the two.
Yep, that is correct. The other tricky thing with breakpoints is the font size, because it actually keeps the font size as it is until the next breakpoint is reached. So you have to keep testing things out and make sure nothing gets cut off.
So if you would compare this breakpoint system to Articulate Rise or the Adapt framework, it sounds like there's more manual work here because you're adjusting the layout rather than the elements adjusting themselves to the space available. Does Fluid Boxes address this?
Fluid Boxes actually does. It's their newer responsive design system. It's good for supporting a wide variety of devices and for easier updating. The trade-off is you have less control over the look and feel. You can't exactly position everything and you don't get exact control over where something is. So if you have a very tightly designed course, it isn't really the ideal for that because you can't decide, I want this to be exactly here and exactly there because it's going to set things at percentages and adjust things based on where other things are. You also cannot group items. So you have to do workarounds for some designs like using states to group objects. You can, however, have font sizes that adjust and adapt to the screen size in a fluid way. And you can even set a minimum font size so you can prevent things from getting too small and unreadable. You cannot use a number of items within the fluid boxes, though. You can't use zoom objects, mouse objects, highlight boxes, click boxes over another object, and You even can't use the line object for some reason. But there's lots of workarounds, like using a shape filled with an image for highlights with a shape with multiple states.
Is there a limit? I seem to recall, at least in early versions, there was a limit to the number of fluid boxes that you have, and if you need more than that, it reaches a certain point and you just can't have any more.
There is. I don't remember off the top of my head the exact number, but yeah, there's only so many fluid box layouts you can do, and once you reach that limit, then you're out of luck.
All right, well, at least we have some options here for how to adjust for responsive design for phones. What tips do you have for using video in Captivate?
Well, I have two main things to talk about. So the first thing about Captivate when using video is that you have to compress the video and get it in the right format before you pull it in. If you're used to working in Storyline, this might be a little bit different process, because in Storyline you can just pull the video in and then set the compression settings. But Captivate doesn't do that. So you need to pull it into another tool like Adobe Media Encoder before importing it. And it's important always to find the right balance of size versus quality. One of the nice things that Captivate has is that it actually has a feature called Interactive Video, and it's found near the top of the menu called the Interactive Video button. You start out by selecting a video, and then you can actually add overlay slides at time points in the video, and those can be quizzes or regular slides that are in your course. The video pauses when it reaches that time portion, and the overlay slide appears over the video. The learner can learn more content about something or complete a quiz and then continue on with your video.
That's interesting. I haven't used that one before. I know one of your favorite languages is JavaScript. Can you talk about how you would use JavaScript or incorporate that into Captivate?
Captivate actually has really good support for JavaScript, and you can do a lot with it. One of the things I like to do with it is do work on Captivate variables using JavaScript. And what I mean by that is if you have a task where you need to add up a whole bunch of variables and add them together, adding the line-by-line action to do that can be really, really tedious. So an easier way to do that is to name your variables in a nice regular manner. Then you actually can include code in JavaScript that pulls all those variables and adds them all up or averages them or does whatever you need to do to them and then puts it back into the Captivate variable, and then you're all done. So it's going to be much, much faster to write.
I know the CP, which is Captivate API interface, is an object available in the Windows scope. What would you use that for?
Well, you actually access it using window.cp API interface .method, and there's a whole variety of methods. The most useful ones are the get variable value, what I mentioned just previously, and set variable value that let you get and set a Captivate variable. But you can use the CP API interface methodology to do lots and lots of things within Captivate in JavaScript. You can play, pause, stop, rewind. You can get and set the volume. You can do things like set a listener in JavaScript using a event emitter that it has built in. Then you can listen for things like a person leaving a slide, entering a slide, someone starting to use the scrub bar, stopping and starting the slides, or even listening for a variable to change. And when that happens, you can then do something in JavaScript.
So when I think about capability versus complexity, there are quite a few things that you could do there that you can't do in other authoring tools, but then it does add a lot of complexity to keep track of how to program all of that. You mentioned before SVGs, or scalable vector graphics. Tell me about Captivate's support for them and how you would use them, or what tips you have.
Scalable vector graphics are a really cool addition to Captivate's arsenal, and it's pulling in support for it is a very helpful feature for developers. The nice thing is that SVGs retain their quality when they're resized because they're a vector format. So you can actually keep file sizes down by including an SVG and then scaling it up and down for whatever you need, especially when you're doing responsive designs. Captivate now actually includes support of SVGs as buttons. You can even alter them in states. One of the nice new features in 2019 is it actually lets you change the colors directly in Captivate. So if you want to use an SVG in a button state and have part of it turn red or part of it turn green, it actually lets you do that directly in Captivate.
Well, Walter, that's a lot of information. Thanks for all these great tips on scalable vector graphics, states, including external content, obtaining and maintaining content, creating mobile-friendly courses, and using JavaScript. Listeners, if you have Captivate tips and tricks you'd like to share or any learning technology topics you'd like to talk to us about, you can message Walter or me on Twitter. You can also send us an email at marketing@innovativελg.com. For a sample Captivate file that illustrates many of the items we talked about today, see the resources section of this podcast on our website.
Thank you for listening. Tune in to our next episode where we will be discussing the infrastructure needed for using virtual reality in training.